When a team like this goes away together, it's very, very important, all right? Because it's in this time that we're sowing the seeds and investing into the future of a company, all right? And companies' growth depends on these times. You must really hear what I'm saying. I've seen some amazing transformations in companies because of times like this. And so it's important that I want each one of you to get that this is a time for you, all right? This is a time for you to grab a hold of something, for you to learn new skills, for you to change some of your own ways of doing things and adopt new ways of doing things, okay? It's an important time. Why do we train? Why do we go away together? Why do we do leadership development? Just now you'll see one of the biggest public speakers on leadership is a guy called John Maxwell. He's written many, many books, and he's spoken all over the world. He's very, very, very famous, all right? And he coined that statement that everybody knows today: everything rises and falls on leadership. And the more I'm involved with different things, the more I see how real this is. No matter what sphere you're involved with, no matter what you do, whether it's a charity, whether it's a project, whether it's a sports team, whether it's a company, whether it's companies, whether it's a government, everything rises and falls on leadership. And it's the truth. And the question I want to ask you is, are leaders born or are they made? How do you see that? Bit of both. Why do you say that?
Some people can learn new tricks and other people just have the gift of from the start.
Yeah. So, and I think that's quite accurate. It's important for us to understand that each one of us is born with a measure of leadership in us. Each one of us. It could be a little bit, can be a lot, all right? Each one of us are born with different kind of giftings that are innately in us. But the reality is this, is for those things to become really strong, we have to go through training in them. And I used the analogy right in the beginning months ago, and that's why I'm using it again to remind us some of the things that we said. But even Roger Federer has a coach. Here you've got what was the world's best tennis player, arguably ever, and even he has a coach, all right? And so it's so important that we realize that this is about us gaining skills and not saying, well, this is how I am, this is how I do things, and realizing that there's new ways of doing things. And the funny thing is, as generations go by, every kind of 8 to 10 years, as we have a new generation of young people coming into the market, things change. Ways change. The way we do things change. And we're going to speak a little bit about that in a minute. So yes, you are born with certain gifts, and you also can improve on them. Now here's the problem. In many scenarios, in many workplaces, people are forced into positions because they were good at their previous job. You know what I mean by that? In other words, what will happen is this. You will have a fantastic sales rep who's brilliant at sales. And suddenly, because he's a good sales rep, they'll make him what? The sales manager. Okay? And that can sometimes flop or do well depending on how he copes with that. And you can go from sales manager to branch manager. All right? And the gap can be sometimes too big for many people without proper equipping. All right? So I want you to think a while back. In the 80s and 90s, corporates and big companies had very bad reputation. They had reputations, let me just mention a few things to you, for sexism in the workplace. Yes, no, do you remember? Into the 80s, 90s, even into the 2000s. What about bullying? Bullying in the workplace. It's a huge problem, all right? How about overworking staff? Demanding of staff way more hours than what was legally even allowed. What about the Me Too movement that was exposed recently with Harvey Weinstein and his big corporate? Okay, you all know about that. And suddenly it spurned this whole movement called the Me Too movement, where women were saying, me too, I've been sexually harassed in my workplace. Okay? And it got to a stage where people just got so sick and tired of bad leadership. We look across governments. Do you know there's one government at the moment that I am so impressed with? And that, I can't think of her name now, I've just lost it, the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda. I am so impressed with that woman. She's young, but she is incredibly good, an incredibly good leader. And the things that she's doing is innovative. They're out of the box. She's thinking differently. She's doing some incredible stuff. Now, it doesn't mean she's not going to make mistakes. But when you look at some of the leadership we have today around the world, and you can see how bad leadership or leadership that has got no emotional intelligence can lead us to the brink of war. Okay? So leadership is a very important thing, is what I'm saying. We have to understand that it spurned all these things. And the result of that has been, through the 80s and 90s, we had a mass of business-related suicides. I don't know if you know it was massive in the UK. Business-related suicides, where people were getting bullied at work, going home and killing themselves because of what they were experiencing in the workplace. And people started to cry out, there must be a better way. And so what the corporates in the UK, because I lived in the UK for 16 years, what they began to do was they began to stop the bus and say, okay, the measure of the success of our company is not just profitability, all right? The measure of the success of our company is part profitability, but the other part is the well-being of our staff. How happy our staff are, how content our staff are at work, whether they're passionate about their jobs. And they started to bring out leadership training programs because they were so desperate. And that's where we find ourselves today. So I believe that companies that do not continually train their staff in terms of leadership and do not raise up leaders is a company that's going to be one-dimensional, and it will not last a very long time because today things have changed so much. So what I want to do is this. I want to ask you to embrace the process of what we're going to go through. We've tried to lay out a very specific process. That's why Jens said, please don't drink too much tonight. Please don't get to bed too late because tomorrow is going to be a long day. And it's like we're building a wall, all right? And we're going to put brick upon brick. Does that make sense? Understanding upon understanding. And what I don't want you to do is to be so tired that you, in your tiredness, you miss a brick out of the wall. And your wall does this. I really want, by the end of this 2.5 days, for you to go away saying, wow, I've really understood something new that I can implement in the company where I work and with the people that I work with. So embrace the process. What do I mean by that? There's a posture that I want you to have inside of you over this time. Usain Bolt is probably, or is, the fastest runner this world has ever known. Okay? When Usain Bolt gets to the starting line of a race, he doesn't stand there like this. Get what I'm saying? What does he do? He postures himself to win. In other words, he gets himself down into the starting blocks, he gets himself into position, and every fiber in his body is ready for that race. All right? And have you noticed when they start running how their heads stay down for at least a third of the race? They come up slowly as they're sprinting. Everything that he's done has been orchestrated because of this posture for that race. And so what I'm asking is this, is that you posture your mind right for the next 2.5 days, because it's going to be kind of a bit of an endurance marathon, but you're going to learn a lot if you stay open and you are able to process slowly the things that we're going to teach you. So that's exciting. The way we're going to start is with a big overview. So I want to put something up on the screen for you quickly. Let's just get this up and have a look at it. This is what John Maxwell said. I was in a big conference once, and I was busy talking about leadership, and I think it was in Kuala Lumpur. And afterwards, we were speaking about this whole thing, and they were bringing up examples of good leadership and bad leadership. And I'm sure if I had to ask you, in politics today, can you mention bad leadership? You'd be able to tell me. If I said to you, can you mention good leadership? You'd be able to tell me. If I had to say to you, in sports teams that you played in, did you ever have a brilliant captain? Did you ever have a really bad captain? If you were in the army, did you ever have a really good drill sergeant or a corporal, or did you have a very bad one? We could all mention. I could ask you, who was your best teacher at school? Who displayed incredible leadership? So when we talk about this, think about it from the perspective of your own life, of who's had input into your life, both good and bad, in terms of leadership, and how you have found the experience. In other words, it's amazing how when you have a brilliant teacher, you love that subject. Isn't that funny? I had a brilliant history teacher, Mr. Hogg. Never forget it. He was absolutely brilliant. You walked into his classroom, and there were rifles, Second World War rifles against the walls. There was helmets. There was, man, you'd walk in, it was almost like, whoa, you know? And the way he explained things, he had this thing of, when he did a new subject, he would always show us a movie. So we would sit down and we'd watch a movie on that subject. And then he would talk about it, and you would be able to see what he was telling us through the eyes of the movie. He was brilliant. So I am passionate about history and how history fits into modern day because of this man. He doesn't even know it. I've never told him that he had such a major impact. And at the end of this discussion, I went home and I was thinking about it back to my hotel, and then I coined this phrase, which I think I have told you, and it says this. Hello. Leadership rises and falls on communication. All right? And the reason why I thought about that was because of this issue. If everything rises and falls on leadership, then what is the what is the heart of good leadership? All right? And good leadership is always about good communication. All right? Have you ever been in challenges in a company and it'll always come out, the communication was terrible? It always comes up. Because communication is such a big thing in terms of how we lead people. And I want to always remind you on this, that leadership rises and falls on communication. So if there's one thing that you want to get right from the beginning, is quality communication with your staff, with your reps, with the people that work with you and for you, to be able to communicate accurately with them. Always over-communicate and not under-communicate if you need to, but always be communicating, all right? Communicating says I care, all right? And how you communicate becomes very important. I want you just to read a couple of things, and then we're going to get through some of the notes. So the next one is this. Okay. The law of the lid, that's number one. These are overviews of leadership, and we're going to be chatting around a couple of these points. The law of the lid is a principle that says this: the ceiling of your growth as a person, as a company, as a corporate, as a country, as an industry, is dependent upon your development as a leader. Can I say that again? The growth of what you are involved with is dependent upon your growth as a leader. And it has been proven over and over and over and over again. All right? And that's the reason why people invest so much money in raising and releasing leaders, in developing leaders. That's the reason why good leaders are so sought after and are headhunted. That's the reason why whenever I go into corporates, I say to corporates, the best place for you to find your leaders is from within. If you don't create a nursery where you over years and years invest in leadership and you build up your own leaders, you will always have to look for the person that you hire. And if you can hire him or her from someone, then someone can hire him or her from you. Does that make sense? They become what we call a hireling. Does that make sense? In other words, we don't want hirelings. We want people whose hearts are invested in the company, who have a passion for the company, who will stay even when the going gets tough. There's that principle. Does that make sense? So the law of the lid is an important principle to realize that that ceiling is dependent upon how we raise leaders. All right? And I've seen that in a sports team. Suddenly you get a brilliant... I did quite a lot of coaching at school, all right, in various different sports. And it was incredible to see, especially into high school and during the army, to see how a leader would come in, whether it was a coach or a captain, and the team's results would change overnight. And you would ask the question, what the heck's going on? It's almost the same team. But suddenly they got a new passion, a new way of doing things. Wat gaan aan? We see it in our provincial, we see it in Super Rugby. A coach gets swapped. We saw it with the Springbok team. Springbok team was on a hiding to nowhere. Suddenly we get in a new coach, whoops, and they win the World Cup. So there is something to be said about that. And I want you to think about the entities that you are involved in and ask yourself the question, how is the leadership development going within what you are doing in terms of raising people, not just on skills to do the job, but on leadership development? Skills to do the job is working in the company. Leadership is working on the company. Okay? It's a different part. Right, that's the first one. The second one, and we're going to just shoot through these because I don't want to be long tonight. The second one is this. The law of influence. Influence. You're all friends here, and we're all friends here, so we can speak really honestly and openly here tonight. And I want to say this to you. There's a principle that says leadership is influence. Okay? Everything rises and falls on leadership. Leadership rises and falls on communication. But leadership is influence. Leadership is not positional. It's not positional. And I've seen this over and over and over again. Do you know that you can be in the position of leader in a team, in an organization, in a company? All right? You can be in the position of authority, but someone else can be the leader because of their influence in that company, both for good and bad. Think about that, both for good and bad, all right? In other words, the person that is injecting the vibe, the soul, whether it's positive or negative into your company, whether you like them or not, whether they're good or bad is irrelevant, that is one of the leaders. And when you get a very good leader in a position, all right, What they do is the word is inculcate, they put in. They inculcate, they put in the DNA, the soul, the heart into the company so that the company behaves and is like they want it to be. Does that make sense? In other words, if you are the senior leader of any entity or any company or anything, you are the one that is responsible to put that heart in, because if you don't, somebody else will. And sometimes that can be good and you can just be fortunate, and sometimes it can be really bad. And then you eat the fruit of that nonsense that's going on in your company, and it's a strain and a stress to you every day. Why? Because there's somebody else leading the soul of your company. It's a nightmare. I've seen it over and over again. That's why I believe it's so important that we wrestle for the souls of our company, for the DNA, for the heart of our company, so that they have the correct heart. Because if they don't, we need to sort it and make sure that they do. So this thing of influence is, leadership isn't position, it's about influence. Okay? So have you ever had this situation? Have you ever had a situation where you've told your children not to hang around certain kids because of their influence on them? You suddenly see your child doing things that you would never thought they would do. And you look at it and you go, what the heck is going on here? And as you investigate, you suddenly realize what's happened. They've got into a different crowd. All right? Ever seen this before? All right? They get into this crowd and suddenly you think, I am not actually happy with this. And so, for many of you, and I know some of you would have had this, you would actually call your child, sit down and say, listen, I need to have a chat with you. That little Johnny that you're hanging out with, it's not that I've got anything against Johnny as a child, as a person. But you need to understand that Johnny's behavior, Johnny's attitudes towards his work and his teachers is influencing you and changing you. Is this the way you've been taught to behave? Have you ever done that before? I certainly have. Now watch this. Is this the way you've been taught to behave? What are you doing at that moment? You are busy enforcing the heart of your house back in your child, isn't it? That's what you're saying. Is this the way you've been taught to behave? In other words, how have you been taught to behave at home? Get that? It's the same thing in a company. In other words, if we don't wrestle the same thing for the vibe, right, of our companies, our people start to hate coming to work. Not because they mind the work, but because they hate the heart, the essence of what it feels like to be there, because you've got this one poople in the corner who's causing turbulence in your company and causing a whole lot of trouble. All right? And as leaders, we are there to protect our company and to protect the people that are in it. The reason why so many women were affected by someone like Harvey Weinstein is because no one policed Harvey Weinstein. He was a law unto himself. And that's the joy about working like this, is none of us are a law unto ourselves. Every single one of us have an accountability. All right? And in the same way that we walk accountably, in the same way, your staff and your guys each need to walk accountably to the DNA of that company. And if they can't grab it, they need to be worked out. It's tough, but it's true. So it's an important one. Leadership is influence. The next one is leadership is navigation. Have you ever been out on the sea, on a rubber duck or on a speedboat or whatever that wasn't yours, and the owner says, yeah, take the wheel, and you just, you go around, etc., etc., all right? You can do it because you can see the shore, you're in the calm of the shore. Does that make sense? That's not the skill. You think you're this main man or main woman because now you've got the wheel and you are flying around, etc. That's the easy part. What's the difficult part? Suddenly you leave shore and you can no longer see the shoreline. You don't know where the land is that way, that way, that way, or that way, because all you see is sea. What is the skill then? The skill is navigation. The skill is the ability to be able to plot a course, to be able to see where I'm taking this thing. All right? That's what leadership is. Leadership is about being able to plot a course, being able to sit down. And here's our problem, guys, is that we get so busy working in our company. All right, the day-to-day humdrum, boom, 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 up early, into the office, do this, do that, that we don't have 10 minutes to stop the bus and plot the course to navigate where we're going. And the power of entities, when you see entities start exploding, is when entities stop and take the time to kind of do this kind of thing, where you actually begin to plot the course, when you begin to say, right, let's look at every one of our entities. Let's make sure every one of our entities has got, they know where they're going over the next 2 or 3 years. And we break that down. You see, with navigation, you have to start with an end course in mind, isn't it? End result. In other words, you can't say, well, we're just going to go where anyway. There's that saying, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. All right? With navigation, you start with what? You start with the end result in mind. I am sailing where? To New Zealand. All right? We're sailing to New Zealand. Okay? That's the end result. Now what do? Now I plot the course backwards to where I am, and it tells me where to go forwards to get to my end result. And that's kind of what strategic planning is. There's nothing special about it. Strategic planning is deciding where do we want to be as a company in 2 years' time. We decide that point, and then we work it backwards into biteable pieces that are attainable, that are exciting, that we can celebrate. That's called navigation. The law of navigation. Leaders navigate. Leaders don't just sit there and go, oh, well, whatever comes will come. It doesn't work like that. So as leaders, it's important that we take our time to stop. And I think Corona has been good for us to actually stop and say, where are we going? And what direction are we going in? Okay, the next one. The law of addition. The law of addition is the law that focuses on advancing others and not ourselves. Have you ever been in a company where somebody will trample on someone to get into another place? Okay? Where they don't care about anybody else but themselves. Where they will not pass on their own secret information that they have gained because that's mine. That's the way I win clients. I will never tell anybody about it because it's my... That's not leadership. That's called selfishness. And the most amazing thing is when you're in a team and you're able to share resources. Guys, this really works. Guys, I've got this tool. Can I pass it on to you? All right? This law of addition is about the willingness to help others get ahead. All right? It's the ability to advance others, to grow others. It's the ability to say, I want to serve the team. The ability to say, I'm here to actually make this team look great. And it's a powerful thing that when you find a leader that's making the team look great. I love that. I look at the World Cup now. I look at the inspiration that Siya Kolisi was during the World Cup. I must be honest with you, because he's quite a quiet guy, I questioned his leadership capacity before the World Cup. I thought, yeah, you know, I really like him as a guy. I so desperately want him to succeed. But I questioned it because he wasn't rah-rah. He wasn't in-your-face kind of, he was just a quiet, solid leader. But the amazing thing that Siya Kolisi did was he built the team in such a way, and between him and the coach, they worked together incredibly to make the team look great. It was an above-average team. It wasn't a great team. Can we all be honest about that? It was an above-average team. It wasn't a great team, but they made greatness because of how they did it. And you know the amazing thing is this. I watch Siya Kolisi on Instagram and his wife. I just follow what they're doing. Almost every single day, they're out feeding the poor. Almost every single day, they are out in communities, bringing truckloads of stuff in. And he's doing it himself. He's got masks on. He's carrying stuff in. And it's that same heart of building a team in the rugby that I'm seeing in his life, doing the same thing. So, true leaders ask, how can I serve? Because they are focused on service and not what's in it for me. That's what true leadership is. True leadership is about that. And you know the amazing thing is when we start to really underpin our staff and we start to really galvanize them into a team, then the multiplication factor begins. Then we start to do far greater things like the rugby team did. It's the law of addition. The next one is this. It's the law of magnetism. Take something that's got a magnet and you just watch and see how it attracts. Okay? I think it's so amazing when you find leaders that that go out of their way to make themselves attractive in a leadership sense. Does that make sense? In other words, I love this grouping of people. And, you know, when I first met you guys, I thought, just we're quite a motley lot. But you know what I love about this group is the fact that everyone just sits down and connects with each other. You've got no special treatment from anybody. No one's trying to be high and mighty. No one's trying to be posh. I love that. There's a reality that comes. And there's a magnetism about that. And it's amazing to hear from guys who have left the JH group for different reasons and how you hear them say, I miss it. I miss those relationships. Something that we must never lose. It's something that's got to be grown on, added to, made bigger. Because you see, watch this, we can be like that here. But if this isn't replicated in our companies, we've already lost. So this vibe, we have to replicate that as leaders into the companies. We've got to take charge of the soul of the company and make it like that. Let me give an example. The Roman Empire, okay? The Roman Empire, there was a saying, when in Rome, do what the Romans do, or do as the Romans do. Do you know about that? Did you know that that had nothing to do with Rome, that saying? What that saying meant was this: as Rome conquered the world, wherever they went, they made the world like Rome. Does that make sense? They enforced the same laws as in Rome. They built aqueducts as in Rome. They put roads in as in Rome. Does that make sense? So when you hear, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, it had nothing. It meant this: when you are under Rome's influence, you do like the Romans do. So the question is this: can we say that when you're under the influence of a team like this is the JH group, then the heart and soul needs to be what this heart and soul is? That's our mirror. So we've got to protect this with everything that we have relationally, and we've got to inculcate that, we've got to put that into each of our companies. What's the use of walking into one of our companies and it feels nothing like Rome or like home? Does that make sense? It has to feel like that. Why? Because that's the success of it. That's how we build what we want to build. And that's how we build over a long period of time. The longevity of what we do is based on the soul. It's not based on what we're selling. It's based on whether we have the ability to build that leadership structure, because the rest will happen. The amazing thing is when you have passionate leaders who don't have to be prodded and pushed, who don't steal from the company, who don't do this, who don't do that. When you've got those kind of leaders, you know what? The company grows. We call it natural company growth. It just, things start going crazy. That's what we want. So the law of magnetism. The next one, I just want to say that these principles, I decided to start off with John Maxwell's main book, all right, before we do our own stuff. It's called the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And I've just taken a few of them out, not all of them, because I wanted to start there with this, all right, before we do our own thing. But in this part, he says this: the law of the inner circle is very important. He says, wherever you look and see great teams, there's always an inner circle. There's always we call it, I introduced the word to some of you guys called a triad, or a creation of a small team within a bigger leadership team, all right, where you have a core team. We can use the word core team, where there's a core team that works together for the greater good of the company. It cannot be one leader. One leader, no matter how gifted he is, no matter how charismatic he is, no matter how much magnetism he's got, cannot run a company successfully all on his own. He will die by the time he's 45, you know. Why? Because you can't handle that. But when you have a team, and the team works well together, that law kicks in of the inner circle. Now, it's amazing. You can look at it across the world. I went and did some research. Google had a core team. Microsoft had a core team. Apple had a core team. If any of you are religious, Jesus had a core team. Peter, James, and John, they were the inner circle. They were the close ones. You look across the board, you see this core team of people that suddenly grow together, and things flow out of it from there. And then the senior leadership team comes around them. And then the greater leadership team comes around that. And then you start to see these circles that flow out. Not positional, but influence-wise. Can you see that? This isn't about us climbing a ladder. This is about influence, the ability to influence, and how the influence starts to go out. And the amazing thing is, the success rate is huge compared to this thing of one man standing on a soapbox, screaming and shouting the odds. It's impossible to do that for a long time. So the law of the inner circle. The law of empowerment is the next one. The law of empowerment is this. It's the desire to empower others, to truly empower one another. All right? You see, for me to find your weakness, all I've got to have is 2 eyes and a critical heart. Isn't that fair? Think about it. For me to find any of your weaknesses and for you to find mine, all you need is 2 eyes and a critical heart, because none of us are perfect. We all have mistakes. We all do things wrong. We all do things. You get what I'm saying? So it's very easy to break down. It's very easy to be critical. It's very easy to look at, But this is the challenge about it, is that what we want to do is we want to identify one another's weaknesses so that we can build them up and make them strong. That's the one part. And the other part is that we want to staff one another's weaknesses. In other words, come alongside to help make strong. So I'm very pro identifying weaknesses. But identifying weaknesses has got to come in the realm of trust. Does that make sense? In other words, I've been doing a bit of leadership stuff with John. It's critical for me to say to John, John, you're strong in this area, you might be a bit weaker in this area, but for him to trust me to say, Michael, he's telling me that because he wants to see me flip and fly. Does that make sense? But for me, if I come in there and all I am just critical of you the whole time, what's the use of that? Can you see? So that polishing of the diamond becomes a really important thing, is that we, all right, become strong as a team when we are able to strengthen one another's weaknesses, but on the other hand, when we are able to staff one another's weaknesses. I might come alongside and say, you might be quite bad in this area. Do you recognize that? Yeah, no, I see that. Well, for the next 3 months, I'm going to just help you. I'm going to give you everything you need to make you better and better in that area until you're on your own. It's like putting those baby wheels on the bicycle, isn't it? I'm going to teach you this, but I'm going to put baby wheels on for you, and I'm going to run alongside you like my dad used to while I was learning. And there's going to come a moment when you're going to fly, and the baby wheels can come off, and there you go. And that's what this is about. The law of empowerment is important. And the problem is this, guys, is that we get so busy that we forget to ask, how can we empower one another, really empower one another? To actually stop and look at each one of your main staff, to start off there with your key staff and ask, what empowering do they actually need? Or am I just happy that they can just basically do the job? They are so stretched, but they can just do the job. Is that okay for me? For me, that's not okay, because we will never grow as a company if we behave like that. The next one is the law of buy-in. The law of buy-in. The law of buy-in is about buying into these things: ideas, vision, direction, ethos or heart. All right? The law of buy-in says this: if you are able to get your people, your staff, to buy in to these main things, if you can get them over time, over wrestling, over challenge, over training, over everything, if you can get them to buy in, all right, suddenly where you work becomes amazing. And you start hearing people say this: I freaking love going to work. I love it. There's something new every day. There's just a vibe. We get on with one another. We vibe off one another. We joke, but we work hard. Does that make sense? I don't mind there being a fantastic vibe in a workplace as long as we're working hard. Does that make sense? But that vibe is really, really important. And here's the challenge, is sometimes we look at it the other way around. All we want to do is get the job done so that we can meet our target, for example, or that we can get a certain amount of money in, or that we can do that. And the challenge is it then becomes the slave. Where if it's done the other way around, where the building up of this leadership heart and the passion for doing the work is so great, our guys will exceed what we build. You see, with a slave, you can build a pyramid. But with free men and women, you build a nation. And I think we've got to think like that. We want to build a nation within our companies. We want to build a feeling of growth and excitement and vision, direction, purpose, heart. But that only comes if we as leaders take that part very seriously and not just go into the humdrum of every single day. The buy-in. Next one, is the law of the big Mo. We're almost done. The law of the big Mo. And the big Mo is the word momentum. The big law is the word momentum. And I do a whole hour with corporates on the lead boot syndrome, and we're not going to do it now. But the lead boot syndrome, have you ever been in a job where it feels like you're walking in syrup? Alles is stadig. You can't get anything done. It's like, tuck, tuck. It just feels like there's no momentum of its own. Every bit of progress you have to fight for. You've got to push. You've got to. One of the key principles in terms of companies is momentum. In other words, if I used to live in the UK, most of you have probably never seen snow unless you've been overseas. I hadn't seen snow until I went overseas. How many of you have never been in snow? You've all been in snow. Have you all been able to toboggan down hills? Have you been able to toboggan down hills? Have you been able to roll a snowball down and watch it get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger as it gathers snow? Well, it's exactly the same thing. This momentum, the ability to start with something, create and generate momentum, and see it take a life of its own. For me, it was so amazing to see the photograph of those fan pack salespeople standing there with their jackets on. Boy, I'd never seen anything so smart in my life. They looked proud. They looked like... And I thought to myself, it's the truth. It's little things that bring momentum. And we all need to be thinking about what are these things that bring and add momentum. We have to have momentum, okay? We have to have it. Because if you don't have momentum, if you don't have that natural power that generates from excitement and vision, if you are the one that's constantly having to push the vision, to push the direction, you know what happens? You quickly get tired. And you get to a stage where you think, what the heck is all this for? I am exhausted. I'm tired. I'm doing more than what I should be doing. I am gutful. I can't see any progress. But suddenly, when you see your next generation of leaders running and they're getting excited, recently we've done a bit of training in different places, and we've received the most incredible emails of people with little exciting bits of information and momentum. And I think to myself, how encouraging. Because if those bottom rung people can get excited and build momentum, we can flip an ethos just like that and make it exciting. So momentum, I don't want to go any more into that. The momentum is incredible and very important. The law of timing. The law of timing is so important. We want to be a corporate, we want to be a grouping of people, we want to be a company, we want to be a group that never shoots from the hip. We want to assess our timing. And we want to be there at the right moment, in the right place, to grab hold of timing. We want to be people that just says, okay, we see that opportunity, evaluate it, send it all through Aiden that he can get all the paperwork done, and he brings back and he asks these questions. And suddenly we say, yes, the door's open, boom, and we jump. And we execute. But when I first arrived here, I said this. I said, if it takes 6 hours to chop down a tree, Abraham Lincoln, we're going to spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. Can you remember that? Many people thought that sharpening the axe was 1 month. I believe that sharpening the axe is probably, in reality, before the explosion of growth, probably 1 to 2 years. We're going to see growth, but the explosion will happen a little bit later on. Why? Because there's lots of axe sharpening that needs to happen as we put things in place and we build. Why? Because we're building for that timing. And you can feel it coming, and you can feel it coming, and suddenly we see the exciting things that are happening. So seizing the moment is very important, but preparing for the moment is more important. So we prepare for the moment. All right? Wade van Niekerk seized the moment, didn't he? All right? Wow. Perhaps South Africa's best runner ever. Male-wise, I would guess, wouldn't you say? What did he break? He broke the 200 meter, was it 200 and 400, eh? 400 world record, but he won the 200 gold as well, didn't he?
200 is still bold.
Yeah, but he won it but he broke the 400 world record, eh? Okay. Amazing athlete, right? But his preparation to seize the moment was months and months and months and months. Then he goes and plays, from what I hear, he goes and plays some touch rugby and does a knee after this. And we haven't heard from him for 2 years. And I heard in the press now, he is now ready to re-enter. It's taken him 2 years to get back. All of this 2 years has been about preparation, getting himself ready to seize the moment. So the question we're going to ask about the JH group, as our moment grows, when is it the moment to seize the moment, to really go for it, to take a few small and large risks, to jump in. For each of the companies, when is that moment? And it sounds like some of you have had the moments recently, certain things that are busy happening, which is exciting. The second last one, the law of explosive growth. Here's the thing. Explosive growth only happens when there are strong leaders around to be able to carry it on. Explosive growth doesn't just happen on its own. It has to have leadership around it to take it on and to take it on. We want to see explosive growth, but the challenge is many companies and people could never cope with it if it ever had to happen. They couldn't cope with it because the leadership base is just too small. They don't have the ability to. That's why we have to take the moment. We have to prepare properly so that when it happens, we have a multiplicity of trained leaders that are ready to go into different positions that we trust. Trust is a very big thing. We can always train somebody to do something, but the reality is, do we trust them to do it? And do we trust them to do it well? And more than that, do we trust them with our people? Is a bigger question, isn't it? Do we trust leaders with people? That's an important one. So, the law of explosive growth. Leaders develop leaders, and that's when multiplication happens. If leaders develop followers, addition happens. When leaders develop leaders, multiplication happens. So the explosive growth comes out of leaders developing leaders. Please never think that you want to make your people do their job better. That's 1/10 of why you're there. The reason why you're there is to say, how can I draw out of these guys leadership promise? How can I build them up that they can become better and better leaders? And if there's anything or anyone that's stopping that in your company, you have to make plans to end that relationship, to end that thing. So if you have somebody in your company that's breaking that down and busting it up, you have to make urgent plans to neutralize that thing, because otherwise that thing grows and becomes a nightmare to you. It becomes a dragon in your own house. You know what I mean? In the UK, there was always these stories of a mother. Very often the father was absent, or the father came in irregularly, and the little child grew up and was never disciplined at home. Never. So this child used to go off at the mother, and you know when the child's small and they don't listen to the mother and they start swearing at the mother and going for the hits, but now they're only hitting at the knees because they're that size. And the mother can do nothing about it. And suddenly this child becomes a 16-year-old boy. It's not so funny anymore. Why? There's a dragon in the house. You know what I mean? There's this problem that's in the house now, and now the mother has to ask the social workers to come and help or the police to come and help to sort the thing out. It's a big problem. And the challenge is, if you take that into company situation, it's the same thing. You know, we have to make sure that we as leaders are raising leaders. And the amazing thing about raising leaders is that means leaders then become responsible for mentoring other people into leadership. So everybody gets covered. No one is left alone. And the last one, and I don't want to talk too much about this because this is going to be one of the last thing that we speak about on this next 2 days, is the law of legacy. Legacy is long-lasting impact. We want leaders who leave an indelible imprint in the lives of people and companies. All right? Wow, can you remember what it was like when that person was around? Yeah. Can you remember the fun we used to have? Can you remember how hard we used to work? But can you remember how we kept it real? You know, we could go out here and have the most amazing time, but yeah, tomorrow we were back. You know what I'm saying? It's this thing of leaving a legacy. I want to ask you this. What legacy do you want to leave? Let's just talk business. Let's not even get personal, all right? But let's just talk about business. What legacy? What do you want to be remembered for as a leader? You need to think about that. As a person, what do you want to be remembered for? What is your legacy? What do you leave behind? I want to say this. Legacy is never about things, it's never about money, and it's never about buildings. Legacy is always about people. It's about people. Legacy is about people. Some people I know, with friends of mine that play golf, but they're like serious golfers. And no one can touch their golf clubs. No one touches their golf clubs. It's like the holy grail is their golf clubs. Do you know, I want to tell you this, if you like that and you got those golf clubs, one day when you die, someone is going to do things to those golf clubs that you never imagined. Why? Because at this moment in time, you are simply a custodian of that. That's all you are. You might think it's yours, but it's not actually yours, because one day when you are pushing up daisies, a little kid's going to come and going to take that 9 iron and he's going to whack it against the metal bar. and you're going to turn over in your grave, but you can do nothing. Can you see what I'm saying? In other words, it's not about things, it's about people. And the amazing thing is when we build people, things happen. Things happen. So the challenge of leadership is this. Let's take these things, the understanding of what it means to grow our leadership, the ability to influence, to navigate, to add, this heart to bring people in and work with people, even when they frustrate us. The inner circle, building up teams all the way around, triads within our companies of people that work together, 3, 4, 5 people, the law of empowerment, where we say we're going to empower people, but really empower them, not just to do their job, but to grow as a leader. The buy-in, the ability for people to buy in to the vision that we have because we articulate it properly. We tell people where we're going. We need to be telling people. Momentum, just that we build a solid momentum, creating explosive growth and leaving behind a legacy that people will always remember.